Hello and welcome to the Screenplay Lab. I am your host, Jeff Barker. I am a screenwriter, and this is a podcast where we study and appreciate the standalone beauty of the screenplay as an independent literary piece, not just a blueprint for the film. We take one screenplay, we break it down, deconstruct it, see what we love about it, what we can learn from it, and this week it is our final Oscar-nominated screenplay, The Brutalist, by Brady Corbet and Mona Fastvold.
On this site, we plan to build a center, a place for gathering, reflecting, learning. And Mr. Toth, I would like you to build this for me. It is no coincidence that fate brought us together.
It is nominated for 10 Academy Awards, including Best Picture, Best Director, that's Brady Corbet, Best Actor, Adrien Brody, Best Supporting Actress, Felicity Jones, Best Supporting Actor, Guy Pearce, Best Cinematography, Loyal Crawley, Best Film Editing, David Jansko, Best Original Score, Daniel Bloomberg, Best Production Design, and what we care most about, Best Original Screenplay by Corbet and Fastvold. It's already won at the Golden Globes Best Picture for a Drama, Best Actor, Best Director. It had a lot of momentum going into the Oscars, but that was pre-controversy. The controversy is about artificial intelligence. They used AI to enhance dialogue to make the characters sound more native Hungarian. They also used some AI for architecture at the end of the film. And right now, the industry is at a crossroads with how to deal with AI and how to protect the creators. But none of that matters to our conversation today because we are talking about the screenplay, the document that made all of this happen. And this screenplay is an intense period piece drama with layered narrative styles highlighting the struggle of rebuilding after a personal trauma, a cultural trauma, and the promise versus the reality of the American dream. Obviously, the writers use architecture as the vehicle to get into the story, but this is not a story about architecture. All right, let's talk about those writers. Corbet and Fastvold, they met in 2012. They are partners both professionally and personally. They've been together in a relationship for a long time now. They have a child. Professionally, they've worked on many projects, including The Sleepwalker in 2014. They co-wrote that. And Fastvold was the director for that project. That's a psychological thriller about an unexpected guest. Then their next film was The Childhood of a Leader in 2015. They co-wrote that one together, and Corbet directed it. It's about the childhood of a future fascist dictator. Then in 2018, they wrote Vox Lux together, and Corbet directed that. It's about a pop star's rise to fame after a tragedy. And now The Brutalist, which is the crown jewel of this collection. Brady Corbet is a 36-year-old from Arizona. He's been in the entertainment business his whole life practically. He was a child actor, many movies and TV shows, including King of Queens. Mona Fastvold is 38 from Norway. She also was an actor. She was in The Other Women. And she directed a film independently of her partner Corbet in 2020, The World to Come. That was about wives of two 19th century farmers. So you can see where all of their stories involve history, societal impact, psychology, and that's what we get with this one. So how was it developed? Corbet and Fastvold say they spent 7 years from start to finish on this project, but they also brought on composer Daniel Bloomberg pretty early in the process because they wanted music to be an integral part of the story. And you'll see how it is not only in the story, but part of the DNA of the screenplay. There were a lot of production companies involved by the end of this, 11 I counted, but it's still an independent film and they were on a tight budget, $10 million. And they shot for only 33 days, which is quite remarkable when you see the scope of this screenplay in this film. It premiered at the Venice Film Festival where it created a lot of buzz. That's where A24 got involved and became the distributor. And when that happened, it was promised to be one of the top motion pictures of the year. Of those 11 production companies, here are a few. Andrew Lauren Productions. They were the first one involved, I believe. They did The Squid and the Whale Brook Street Pictures, they do a range of genres. Brothers by Blood is one of their films. 360, they've repped a lot of big music stars, but they also were involved in one of their previous films, the Vox Lux movie. And Killer Films, they do complex societal issues, which this one certainly falls into. One of their movies is Carol. All right, here is the official logline of The Brutalists. When visionary architect and his wife flee Europe to rebuild their legacy and witness the birth of modern America, their lives are changed forever by a mysterious and wealthy client. And here is my go at it. Fleeing post-war Europe in pursuit of the American dream, a visionary architect wrestles with identity and trauma as he battles with a mysterious patron to bring his artistry to life. Some statistics about this screenplay: it's 130 pages, 165 scenes, and the runtime of this film, you may have heard, 3 hours and 35 minutes, including a 5-minute intermission. And that's very rare these days. The last time we had anything like that was in 2015 with Quentin Tarantino's Roadshow edition of The Hateful Eight. It had an intermission in it. If this screenplay were 1 page per minute, you're looking at a 210-page screenplay. This one is 130, and it comes to 1 minute, 36 seconds per page. And something we started several episodes back is trying to dig deep into the title of the screenplay and see what type of meaning we can derive from it. I found 4 meanings to The Brutalist, the title of this screenplay and film. The first is the most obvious. We'll go from most obvious to a little deeper. The first is the architectural style. Obviously, the Brutalist style emerged after World War II. It was raw, blunt, concrete structures, cheap, practical, easy to make, fast, but it was very polarizing. It was symbolic of socialist utopia on one side, and on the other side it was a symbolism of just giving people the bare minimum and not taking care of people. Another meaning to this title would be the brutality of uncompromising personality. The main character here struggles with many traumas and personal flaws, but his sense of identity never wavers. This drives others around him to be angry, jealous. How dare he not know his place? But he prioritizes his vision and ambition over personal relationships, sometimes putting up thick walls, cement walls. If we go another layer deep, I'd say a third meaning would be the brutality of the reality of post-war survival, the brutal task of starting over, the physical and psychological pain of refugees and immigrants, the sacrifice and moral compromise required to try to assimilate. And the fourth and deepest layer to the title of this film and screenplay, I believe, is the brutality of the American dream. Along the way, discovering the erosion of idealism. At its core is the idea that America is the place where anyone can succeed, but the starting line is not the same for everyone. In fact, the obstacles and the race itself is not the same for everyone. All right, we'll get into the pages here. We always start with formatting, mechanics, and style to see exactly what is unique about this document and learn how each screenwriter wants us to read their screenplay. First thing that jumps out at you here that's unique are the chapters of the screenplay. They break it down into 4 parts. First is the overture to get you started and kind of get you into the story. Then on page 4, we move to part 1, The Enigma of Arrival, 1947 to 1952. Then there's that intermission we talked about. And then on 68 is the beginning of part 2, The Hardcore of Beauty. That's 1953 to 1960. And then that slides us into page 127 with the epilogue at the very end, which takes place in 1980. This makes the screenplay very structured. When you first see that overture in that part 1, okay, this is a screenplay that is very organized, very rigid, much like the architecture that we're talking about here. In fact, you will see a lot of similarities in this screenplay itself, not the story, but the actual document that resembles this brutalist architecture. Here's another example of that. These large dialogue chunks. They are thick, they are weighty, they are heavy, they are philosophical. When you look at it on the page, they sometimes look like foundation of architecture going right into the ground. And it's compensated with these short, punchy action lines. And I believe this is how they save room and don't end up with a 200-page screenplay. They move the story along very quickly, then they let the characters get very deep and philosophical with their lines. Another device they use a lot and quite well are the montages. There are 8 of them in this screenplay, although some of them maybe you wouldn't call a montage if you're sticking to the very strict definition of a montage having to be something that takes us across a long period of time. Some of them are a series of shots to establish things, but they all do move the story forward. The first one is a series of shots showing us life below the ship deck. The next one is entering Philadelphia. This is more of an establishing shot, but it is a lot of shots to show us that this character is moving into this new location. We also have Laszlo working. We have Laszlo preparing Van Buren's study. We have the building an architectural model. We have materials around the world being constructed to be sent to this location. We have looking for Van Buren when he goes missing, and the establishing shots of Venice. So if you're of the mindset that you should not have more than 2 montages in a screenplay, it's worth looking at this one and see if this works for you as another tool in your toolbox. Another choice that they make is using voiceover quite a bit, and that goes hand in hand with what we just talked about. Someone has written a letter, and the other person is reading it in their mind, hearing their voice, while this is happening and giving us information and backstory and catching us up to date of what's happened. We're also seeing things take place. So we're almost getting 2 stories at once. We're getting the linear story of what's happening and also the visual story through the screenplay of what else is going on. And this is important when you're building a story around architecture, a very visual medium. You have Erzbet's letter to say that she's still alive. You have Laszlo to tell her that he changed his address, although he doesn't tell her why. Then you have Laszlo's letter to Erzbet saying that he believes that he can get her to the United States because of the new people that he's met. Then you have Erzbet's letter to Laszlo to say that she found a picture of them. This is all pretty much early in the screenplay, so it happens a lot. But then it tails off. We get one toward the end where Erzbet is writing to Sophia, giving her information about how much Laszlo is decompensated and become obsessed with his work and irritable. And that gives us a lot of information that it would take a long time to get through characterization. Obviously, there are multiple languages in this screenplay. The way they do it is they designate the first time the new language talks with brackets as parenthetical, and then the actual dialogue itself is in italics. So easy to follow, very different from what we saw on the last episode when we looked at Conclave, a whole different technique. You can watch that video and see how they did it. Another choice they make is the first time the character shows up in the script, not only do they put the name in all caps, but they also put it in bold. Here's an example on page 28. The esteemed and handsome Harrison Lee Van Buren Sr. enters the room. You can see there it's all caps and bolded. This allows them to take it a step further, and every time a name shows up in the screenplay anywhere, it's in all caps. Here's an interesting one to look at on page 92. You have 4 characters in this one small action line. They're all in all caps. And they use very minimal character introductions, even for the main character. On page 2 here, this is when Laszlo is introduced. It says, Laszlo Toth, malnourished with a badly broken nose. He has the face of an immigrant. And that's it. That's all it says about him. They also use bold every time they want to indicate a significant action taking place, like this one on page 40. Laszlo comically vomits on himself where he stands. Right there, all bold. Another example of how this script mimics brutalism is how it uses the sound effects and the music cues. It's in there every time, very rigid, very structured, very raw. It's not worked into an action line. It's not just put in there where you can find it. Here's an example on 63 where you see it says bang, bang, bang. You'll see that in a lot of screenplays, but you don't often see it indicated with sound effects. It's just worked into the action line. And then 18 times they use cue, and this is regarding music. This is how they got the composer together as they were writing the screenplay, and they have the songs laid out from the beginning. Here on 34 as an example, you see it says cue, To Each His Own by Eddie Howard overtakes the soundtrack. And then on 39, it's not a specific music piece, but it says cue, the live music plays in ultra slow motion. So these are things that all screenplays have, but because they're indicated so bluntly with the sound effects and the cue. It's very rigid, very specific, very minimalistic, very brutalistic. They also get very specific about transitions 15 times in the screenplay, and not just fade in and fade black. They've got jump cut, which is a very specific cut that progresses time. You know, we have one person and all of a sudden everything's changed, but they're sort of in the same spot. Hard cut, they use that one once. They use the jump cut twice. I don't know if I said that. Then they do have the fade to black, fade in 6 times. They use that. And then this was the one I really thought was interesting. Cross dissolve 6 times in the screenplay. Another unique element is they have a post-credit instruction on page 130. You can see it here. Really cool. Where they say exactly what they want to see at the end of the credits. They want to see this digital video montage of mid-century architectural masterpieces from all over the world. And it goes into detail about what it's supposed to look like, how they want to do that. That's not something you see every day. All right, we're going to take a quick break, but when we come back, I'm going to tell you why I believe this screenplay was worthy of its Oscar nomination. Hi, if you're enjoying this so far, I am so very grateful. Please don't forget to like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. And if you're listening to it, leave a review. That helps a lot. I also update regularly on all the socials, and I'd love to meet with you there and be a social media friend with you. And also, if you like this sort of thing, I dig even deeper on my Substack. That's the written version, where you can sign up and get a weekly newsletter. I'd love to have you there as well. The best way to keep up with me is at my website, jeff-barker.com. Hope to see you there.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.
Here's why I believe that this screenplay is worthy of its Oscar nomination. Not only is it an excellent story with deep psychological themes, which we'll get into later, but also because the document itself, the actual screenplay, is a brutalist piece of art. I know I've already said that a couple of times, but I want to explain it a little more now. It is raw, it is blunt, it is concrete. It has these monolithic forms. The dialogue is massive and blocky, imposing, and it has repetitive patterns like the voiceover device, the mirrored language, which we'll get to in a minute, calling for similar shots. It is practical. It has the detailed camera directions, calling for specific lenses, even editing instructions. It's function over ornamental style. The character introductions for the scene descriptions are very, very minimal, very blunt. And it is a blueprint. And I always say, you know, these screenplays are not a blueprint for the film. They're their own literary devices. This one's both. I mean, this is, you can't deny it. It is laid out there with instructions. And that makes it very brutalist. It's also polarizing, even more so now with the AI controversy. And this story in itself is not a story about the American dream. This is a story about the American myth, which in itself, especially in these political times, is very polarizing. And it is a painstaking labor to get through the screenplay. Not that it's hard to read or a bad story. It's a pleasure. But because it is laid out more like an instruction manual, you get pulled out of the story a little bit. So you have to put in the work. You have to put in the labor. Just like to create a piece of brutalist art, it takes a while, even though you can do it pretty quickly compared to other architecture. It's still a process, and that is what this screenplay is. It's a process. But most of all, it's worth it. The writing's good, the story's good, and it is interesting how they put it together, and I believe it is worthy of its Oscar nomination. And now let's talk about that direction on the page. Of course, they use the we and the us quite a bit, putting us in the position of the camera lens. One of the ones I thought was most interesting that they use 3 times when they say things rush at us. Again, I haven't seen the film, but I can see it in my head. Twice it's the asphalt, once it's the train tracks. I could see it just speeding to the camera. And they are visual storytellers for sure. The framing is in extreme detail in this screenplay. And again, this is kind of what makes it feel like an instruction manual. You've got the 95 times they mention the framing. You've got the close on, the ultra close 15 times, the wide, the ultra wide 10 times, medium on once, low angle, new angle 28 times, Then you have the tracks, the track left, the track right, track fast, track slow, track behind, 19 times. You have the pans, slow pan, pan up, pan across, pan down, pan off, whip pan. They do that 11 times. You have the tilts. You got tilt up, tilt down, tilt slow. You've got the pushes. You've got the hold-ons. You've got the bird eye views 4 times. The POVs twice. Again, add it all up. 95 times they're giving you very specific instructions of how to use the camera. And they also tell you which camera and which lens to use 28 times. They call for the ultra bode lens twice, which is really cool. The long lens 10 times, which gives you tremendous depth of field. The wide angle lens, which I hear and I've seen from the trailer that there are tons of wide shots in this film. They call for the Steadicam 4 times, the handheld cam 7 times, and then just the old camera and whatever lens they need to put on it 4 times. So 28 times they ask for specific lenses. Here's an example on page 8. It says ultra wide, low angle on asphalt as it rushes at us. Series of angles on. So it's sort of an example of everything we just talked about. Very mechanical, very brutalistic. They call for a really cool tracking shot that lasts 5 pages. I hope it ends up like this in the movie. I'm going to see the film real soon, and I can't wait to see. This is one of the things I'll be looking for. But it starts on page 121. This is when Erzsébet goes to confront Van Buren at his house. And you can see on 121, it says, note, the following sequence is in one unbroken take until otherwise noted. Then you go through 5 pages to 126, and it says, note, end of continuous take. She comes in, she confronts them, they grab her, they pull her out. Then everybody's looking for Van Buren. Then they go through all of the architecture that has been built. So it's another way to showcase the architecture and show you how far it's come. And then they find him. So yeah, I hope that's in the film. And then also filming and editing notes in the screenplay. On 109, it says, white heat. The searing image is overexposed by 2 stops. I thought that was really interesting because you do see quite a bit in screenplays where they're trying to get this image across and be like, it's blown out, it's overexposed, and then the eyes adjust. And they write that in some literary way or maybe even give a direction on it. But they're so specific, they said by 2 stops. I mean, that's like a recipe. Another example is on page 3 where it says, increasingly overwhelming sunlight throwing off our camera's white balance. How often have you read a screenplay where they talk about the white balance? I don't know if I ever have. Now we'll get into the writing itself. And when we meet the antagonist, I was really impressed because they really give us the antagonist at his worst almost. They give us a true look at who he is. And this is significant because it allows us to be lulled asleep by his generosity, by his kindness. And then it comes back at the end and is revealed to us just how much of an evil monster this person is, talking about Van Buren. You can see examples here on 28, 29. He comes on, he's very angry, he's aggressive, he's disrespectful. He's putting them in their place. You could tell that he believes he's above them, not just financially, but from a race class standpoint. The reason why this is important is because at the end, when he becomes this monster and he assaults our main character in the most horrible way, if we hadn't seen that version of him earlier, it would almost been unrealistic. But because we saw that and then we forget about it, like I said, we get lulled to sleep by some of the things that happen. And then it shows up, it's surprising, but then it's not because we're like, oh yeah, that's right. That is him. I do remember that. Obviously, that's what we would call grounding the character. And they do that very well. And he is a fully drawn character, Van Buren. He's a contradiction. Generous, but only in ways that serve himself through being patronizing or gaining stature. He uses compassion, but only as a transaction so that he gets something out of it. Well, like the example is the monologue about the check for his grandparents. This story goes on, and he's trying to get to the point of how clever he is, but he's actually showing how cruel he can be and how he's going to get ultimately what he wants out of any social interaction. He's very jealous of Laszlo, but not so much in his talent, although he does respect the talent. He's jealous of the main character's deep sense of self. Van Buren is insecure. He's on a mission to buy his self-worth, whatever it takes. Run through the family money to put himself in a position where he feels good about himself. But in the end, it comes full circle to that first scene that we talked about, and he shows us that he's a coward, that he runs away, that he can't face the consequences of his action, of his true self. The writing really focuses on the humanity. For example, on page 1415, in a matter of one page, we get to see the full scope of our main character. He shows us his kindness by offering to return to the food kitchen early the next day so that this kid can be fed. And then right away, he gets onto the trolley and tries to pickpocket people. Shows us the true turmoil and pain of a character going through something to make them so desperate for survival. Laszlo is a man of many flaws, but he never compromises or pretends to be someone he's not. And that drives the people around him mad. Erzsébet begins as a ghost in the story. We only hear from her through this voiceover, through these letters. And then when she finally arrives halfway or third of the way through the story, she's not who we expect. We fall into this trap through the letters to believe that she's someone weak, someone to be taken care of. And then when she shows up in a wheelchair, that further solidifies this idea in our head, but it's false. It is her at the end who has the true agency. She is the one who confronts the antagonist, not Laszlo. She is the one who makes the decision for Laszlo to return to Europe. And it's really beautiful how they did it. Starts on page 4 in this letter that she's writing, and she says, "Go to America and I will follow you." Because remember, she gets derailed to another country. And then on page 120, she's in the hospital and she's talking to Laszlo, and the tables have been turned. And he says, "I will follow you until I die." And he does. He follows her to Europe. They use mirrored language a couple of times in the screenplay, which I always appreciate and love. It's when you end one scene with one line and you start the next scene with the same line. This is in itself its own type of transition. One example is on 55. Van Buren ends the scene by saying, "Don't talk to me about money." And then the next scene starts with his son Harry saying, "Don't talk to him about money." Those are just little things to me that I really appreciate. For a film that I understand has a deep sense of setting and is nominated for Best Cinematography and might very well win, the script sort of breezes right over the settings quite a bit. Lets you know where you're at, a little bit of what it looks like, but that's it. They dabble in it a little bit here on 106 when they're describing the Italian mind, and you can see it here. I saw an interview with Courbet where he was saying that they picked this specific Italian mind because it is a place itself of great abuse. It's now nearly depleted of natural resources that have been stolen from the community. He calls it, the scene, the descent into the pit of hell for the darkest of humanity. And if you've seen the film or read the screenplay, you know it takes place inside that pit. These short, punchy action lines are propped up by this dense dialogue, but it's good. They have some excellent dialogue in here. One of my favorites is on 84. This is when Laszlo is confronting Jim Simpson, his rival, and he says, "Everything we see that is ugly, stupid, cruel, and ugly." He goes back to that one again. Everything is your fault. Here's how it shows up in the film.
Everything that is ugly, cruel, stupid, but most importantly, ugly. Everything is your fault.
But the pinnacle of the dialogue, the most emotional exchange is in the car leaving the hospital between Laszlo and Erzsébet. He is finally vulnerable and opening up and allowing her in a little bit, letting her know what he's going through, what he's thinking. And he lays it out there. They don't want us here. We're nothing to them. We're worse than nothing. They don't care about us. It's so beautiful. Here it is in the film.
accuse me of making a pass at her.
You would never do that.
I did not do that.
Then why would she say such a thing?
Because they do not want us here.
Of course Attila wants us here.
Not Attila.
Then who do you mean?
The people here. They do not want us here. Audrey, Attila's Catholic wife, does not want us here. She does not want us here. We are nothing. We are worse than nothing.
I also really like this writing on page 118. This is the lovemaking scene between Laszlo and Erzsébet. It says, the room is very dark. The two of them make love. An elbow, an arched back, an intense physical dream. Score for piano gives the sequence warmth and a strange feeling. And it's because even though they're married and you're rooting for them, the circumstances in which they're coming together at this moment, they don't feel right. They feel kind of icky. They do feel strange. And the final lines of the screenplay are just excellent. This is Sophia. She is speaking for Laszlo, who can't speak. And remember at the beginning of the screenplay, she wouldn't speak. So he had to speak for her. Now she's speaking for him. This is 1980. He's very elderly. She's middle-aged. And he's being honored because of all of his work. She's talking about his career and his creations, his legacy. On 129, she says, "Don't let anyone fool you, Sophia," he would say to me as a struggling young mother during our first years in Jerusalem. So she's catching us up on the story in a very creative way. No matter what the others try to sell you, it is the destination, not the journey. And this is a flip, a play on the saying where it says it's about the journey, not the destination. It makes a lot of sense in this screenplay, what she's saying. In fact, she's giving us the whole point of the screenplay. And that is, Laszlo realized along the way that America was not the saving destination that he had hoped for when he was fleeing from post-war Europe. It was impossible for him to continue to be true and authentic and honor his ideas and his art without giving away a part of himself. For him, the journey wasn't worth it like it was for others. Often in life, it is true that it's about the journey and not the destination, because life is what happens when we're busy doing stuff, making plans, having dreams. But in the creation of art, you as an artist will know this. It is a painful labor, and the journey is a necessary process, but it is not the point. The point is the art. That is the point. We'll breeze through the narrative elements this time. The most important thing to look at is the symbolism, and that is concrete. The defining material of the brutalist architecture. It symbolizes Laszlo's desire to build something lasting, since he has been standing on slippery ground for decades. The war, the escaping, the immigration experience, the poverty, the trauma, the abuse, feels like the whole world's slipping out from under him. He needs something stable. The concrete is cold, it's unyielding, much like his ambition to separate himself from his past. But he can't. Speaking of cold, that's our first tone. Cold and stoic. Feels clinical, measured, precise. The story does. It's also tense and brooding. There's this underlying tension, this psychological intensity. It's so creepy in a lot of ways on the page. And again, I can't wait to see it as a film because it may play totally different. But on the page, this thing could easily have been a horror film. I think you give me this screenplay in a couple of hours and I could, well, first of all, I would disgrace it because it is a beautiful screenplay, but it could easily be turned into a horror film. Laszlo, in his art, he's unyielding and uncompromising. His rigidity leads to conflict with all of those who hope to control him, have a piece of him. They're not getting in. It reminds me in some ways of another episode where we broke down A Complete Unknown by James Mangold, the Bob Dylan biopic. He also was like this. He was so driven about his art that no one could get close to him. Another theme is power and control. And Van Buren in this story, he represents wealth and corrupt entitlement, those things that come with privilege at times. But that's counterintuitive to art. At the same time, it's impossible to build something truly great without resources, without collaboration. Now let's take a quick look at some of the visual elements of this screenplay. And it is a fascinating screenplay. It's a story about the American dream versus the American reality for the immigrant. It's also a story about not compromising when it comes to your art and not giving up yourself just to assimilate to something you think that you want. And this is a screenplay that totally embodies the true themes of the brutalistic architecture. Not just the story, but the blueprint itself. The opposite of what I usually say. Please visit me on jeff-barker.com where you can keep up with all the stuff that's going on in my life and my career. Also, like, subscribe, comment, all that stuff. I would really appreciate it. If you're listening to the podcast, please leave a review. That helps a lot. Visit me on all the social media sites. I'd love to hook up with you. And also, you can find me on Substack, where I do a newsletter about all of these screenplays, where you get a little more information than what we talked about here. Please share me with your filmmaking friends and your screenwriting friends and your friends. I would love to connect. And that is it on The Brutalist. And I'll see you next time right here on the Screenplay Lab.
Thank you for watching my dad's podcast.